Here are some key topics that we will be talking about in terms of general financial advice and then transforming them into financial independence advice. Hello everyone, my name is Zach and welcome to On Cash Flow, where I help you become a master of your own cash flow. Now let's get started. The first topic I want to talk about today is debt. When it comes to personal finance, a rule of thumb when it comes to how much debt you should safely have is don't have more debt than a maximum debt to income ratio of 43%. And what debt to income ratio basically means is you take your monthly debt obligations and divide it by your monthly gross income. So for example, if you have a total amount of debt of $3,200 and you make $8,000 per month, like before taxes or anything's taken out, then you would take $3,200 divided by $8,000, and that should give you a debt to income ratio of 40%. So with this example, you are under the maximum recommended debt to income ratio of 43%. And what's going to be included in that monthly debt obligations is going to be things such as your mortgage, maybe a car loan, student loans, or anything like that. Things that you have to pay for every month, and they are paying down a balance of debt. However, when it comes to debt and financial independence, the general consensus, the general rule of thumb is to avoid debt entirely if you can, except for a mortgage or except for any other kind of mortgage that's for real estate investing, for rental properties. It's better to stay away from consumer debt, credit card debt, student loan debt to try to pay that off, or any other kind of debt that is not directly tied to an asset. The next topic with a really big difference I want to talk about is investing, and more specifically, how much of your money to invest. The general rule of thumb in personal finance is to invest about 10% to 15% of your gross income towards your retirement. And the way you would generally see what your gross income is on your W-2 right there in box 1. That's usually what's referred to as your gross income. So with our example, someone making $96,000 per year, they would multiply that by 10% to 15%. So that would give them anywhere from $9,600 to $14,400 per year that they should be putting towards their retirement if they were following the general personal finance rule. However, when it comes to financial independence, this is where a huge difference exists. Because when you're trying to achieve financial independence, early retirement, then you're going to need to invest a lot more of your income, a larger portion of your income. And usually the starting point is somewhere around 50% of your income, plus or minus 20%. So you have the more extreme side of some people recommending upwards to 70% of your income being saved for financial independence. And then you have the more moderate side of people recommending around 30% of your income towards financial independence. But still that 30%, that moderate savings rate is still double the general personal finance rule of 15%. And now speaking of financial independence and being on the path to it, if you want to make sure that you're on the path to financial independence, I have another video for you, but we'll talk more about that at the end. Let's get on to another big personal finance topic, and that is the price and the cost of your vehicle or your car. So the general personal finance rule of thumb is to spend no more than about 10% to 20% of your gross income on your total transportation expenses or your total car expenses. This would include not only just the car payment itself, like for a car loan, this should also include things such as your insurance, your registration, maintenance, and things like that. Going back to our example of someone making $8,000 per month, we multiply that by 10% to 20%. So they should theoretically spend no more than about $800 to $1,600 per month on their total vehicle expenses. Where financial independence differs a lot is there is no actual percentage-wise, like, hey, at least 10%, but no more than 20%. But instead, we see the car expense as one of the big three. So the big three is housing, transportation, and food. So right there at number 2 is transportation. The big three in financial independence is seen as one of the biggest opportunities for drastically reducing your fixed expenses. And so the general rule of thumb is to keep your car expenses pretty much as low as possible while also, maintaining safely, right? Not driving something that's unsafe, but getting that fixed expenses of transportation as low as possible, because we see vehicles generally as something that just gets you from A to B safely and back to A. But there is an exception, and that is if you actually do highly value vehicles, if you truly value having a nice vehicle, then it is okay to spend more on that vehicle in terms of how the financial independence community sees it. So we want you to spend more on the things that you actually value. But if you just see a vehicle mostly as something that gets you from point A to point B, then try to spend a low amount on your vehicle expenses while also, obviously maintaining your safety. The next one is another part of the big three, and that is your home, which happens to be number 1 of the big three. General personal finance rules of thumb will tell you to spend no more than 28% of your gross income on your housing expense. And as a side note, the general personal finance rule of thumb is also to buy a home rather than to rent, because it's seen as throwing money away. Like rent is seen as throwing money away, while buying a home is seen as buying an asset, which is actually totally false, but that's a whole nother story. Anywho, going back to our example of someone making $8,000 per month, if we multiply that by 28%, then this rule of thumb would say that they should spend no more than $2,240 on their housing expense. As a nice little example, I looked at my home state where I live now, which is Tennessee, and in my state at current mortgage rates, this could afford you around a maximum of $336,000 for a house. However, you can already see that if you make $8,000 per month and you're living in a much higher cost of living, like a higher cost of living state, then you're probably not going to be able to afford a home and use this personal finance rule of thumb. When it comes to financial independence, the consensus is a little bit different. There isn't necessarily a percentage of your gross income that you should be spending on housing. It is seen as one of the big three, which is the number one, and the general consensus is to try to get your housing expense as low as possible. There are some, general guidelines you can follow, like you're living in a smaller home or living in a slightly less prestigious neighborhood and things like that. However, one of the more popular ways is to actually find a way to house hack your home. That essentially means turning your home into some kind of investment where it can bring in a little bit of income to offset your housing expenses. And when it comes to the rent versus buy debate, it heavily depends on your location and your lifestyle preference. The lifestyle that you're going to live by being a renter is dramatically different than the lifestyle that you're going to live by being a homeowner. And plus, it just depends on where your location is on what's going to be more financially advantageous. So that is why the answer is it depends, but the general answer is to try to get your housing expenses as low as possible. Now, really quick, I just want to say that I put a lot of research into looking up these personal finance rules of thumb, so I would really appreciate it if you just took a quick second and hit the like button on this video. Now, getting back into the good stuff here, the next one is budgeting. So the most popular budgeting rule of thumb in personal finance is probably going to be the 50-30-20 rule. The 50-30-20 rule says 50% of your income should go towards your needs, 30% towards your wants, and 20% to your savings and investing. For example, our person making $8,000 per month, they would spend about $4,000 on their needs, $2,400 on their wants, and $1,600 on their savings or investing. This isn't going to fly when it comes to financial independence, and the reason why is that it's simply a too low of a savings rate. Now, instead, what financial independence advocates generally recommend is to decrease the amount of spending on your needs and then instead redirect that money into your savings while keeping your wants relatively the same. We want you to keep your wants or your discretionary spending relatively high because that introduces a level of flexibility in your spending, because you can temporarily reduce your wants and then you can ratchet them back up if you need to while you're living a financial independence lifestyle. Now, when it comes to your needs, that's generally considered your fixed expenses, something that you pretty much have to pay for. So if you're able to get those very low, then you'll have a lot more flexibility in your financial lifestyle. So if we were to take the 50-30-20 rule and transform it into a financial independence rule, it might look more like 30-30-40. 30% for your needs, 30% for your wants, and 40% savings rate. The next financial advice when it comes to personal finance is one that you might call a sacred cow, and that is the emergency fund. The most common quoted emergency fund amount that you should maintain in personal finance is going to be 6 months of your spending. And you'll see anywhere from 3 to 9 months being generally recommended, but 6 months is probably the most common. So for that person making $8,000 per month, if they were saving 20% of their income, then they would actually be spending $6,400 per month, and multiply it by the number of months for their emergency fund. Then the general rule would recommend them have about $38,400 of an emergency fund in cash or cash equivalents. However, the answer to the emergency fund question is a lot more nuanced when it comes to financial independence, because it is seen as something that is heavily dependent on the individual themselves. It's more dependent on what is your risk tolerance, what is your current asset values, like how much is your net worth right now, and actually how much do you have in insurance, because all three of those factors are going to be strong indicators of how much you should probably be keeping in cash. If you have a higher risk tolerance, then you might want to hold less in cash. If you have a low risk tolerance, you might want to hold more in cash. If you have a high net worth that you could theoretically use as part of an emergency, then you're going to need less in cash. If you have a low starting net worth, then you might need more of it in cash to pay for emergencies. If you have insurance that could cover some of these emergencies, then you might need less cash. If you don't really have any kind of insurance that can cover emergencies, then you might need more cash. And that's also different because we have a higher savings rate. So if you do take someone that's making $8,000 per month, but they're saving half of that, a 50% savings rate, then they're really only spending $4,000 per month. And $4,000 per month times 6 is a lot less than $6,400 per month times 6. Now this leads me to the big question here. I want to know from you in the comments below. What are some other general personal finance rules of thumb that we can take and transform into financial independence? Please let me know in the comments below. I'm really curious to hear what you have to say. And now the next one is a pretty quick one, but it is very important, and that is credit cards. So the general rule of thumb when it comes to credit cards in personal finance is mostly to just stay away from them and not use them, and instead use debit cards or cash. However, when it comes to the FIRE community, I think we look at it a lot differently. Because we are so in tune with our personal finance, we're so in tune with our spending, we are very aware of our spending, we are able to use credit cards effectively to basically get all of the rewards of them without any of the drawbacks, right? We don't actually carry balance. We pay them off every month. And instead, what we do is we get rewards such as cashback and travel rewards. And so you'll see a lot of people in the FIRE community being actual advocates of credit cards if you're able to safely and smartly use them. And now we come back to investing, and more specifically, asset allocation. So a general finance rule of thumb that's been around for a long time is between your asset allocation of stocks and bonds, you're going to take the number 100 and subtract your age. And whatever that number happens to be is how much you should be invested in stocks. However, in more recent times, that's been changed to 120 minus your age. So if we take that new rule and apply it to my life, I'm 28 years old right now as I make this video. So if we take 120 minus 28, that would indicate that I should have a stock allocation of about 92%. That would be my recommended asset allocation based on this rule of thumb. However, in the financial independence community, we don't take age really into consideration much at all. Instead, what we take into consideration more is what are your goals when it comes to your investing and what is your risk tolerance. No matter what age you are, if you have a low risk tolerance, you should probably not have significant amount in stocks because that could lead you to panic selling and locking in losses during bad economic times. Vice versa, if you're, let's say, 40 years old, that doesn't necessarily mean you should be 80-20. It might mean that you could be 100% stocks if you have a high risk tolerance and you still have a long way to go before you're going to be withdrawing from your investments. So it also depends on your goals. Like, are you going to be retired today? Are you going to be withdrawing 4%, 5%? Only 3%? So it really just depends on what your goals are and what your risk tolerance is of how much you should have allocated between stocks and bonds. Now, like I mentioned earlier, if you want to know for sure if you're on the right path to financial independence, I have a great video for you, okay? I have a complete guide to getting started on the path to financial independence. Even if you have already been on the path, I think this video is going to help you out a lot. That video is going to pop up right on the screen right after I get off the screen. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'm Zach from OnCashflow.com, and I hope to see you next time. And what's included in those monthly debt obligations? It might look more, that has been changed to, even if you are looking up the consensus when it comes, and looking up the consensus,